So one of the questions that often comes up is, what should I name my business? And what's interesting is that if you take a moment and sort of pay attention to the business names that you see around, what it can tell you is a number of things. One of the things I see often with small businesses is they use their own name in their business name. Now, that might in itself, be simple and straightforward and so on. But the thing is, the reality is that people really don't care about you or your name. And for most people, their name is not substantially high profile. And so most people have never heard of you. And so therefore it's not like your name is going to bring a profile to your business that is going to be beneficial. And so quite often if you're driving around in the car and you just pay attention to all the different sort of vehicles that are around you, you see sign written utes and tradie vehicles, and you'll see Bob's Carpentry or Joe's Plumbing or whatever. And yes, it sort of says what they do. They're a plumber or a carpenter or a builder. But who's Joe? Who's Bob? It doesn't really make sense. So one thing to think about is when you're coming up with a name, there's a few different factors involved. I think one thing that's important to do is explain what it is that you do. And so it could be something like win more clients, for example, could be a good business name for somebody in a marketing business. Because what it shows is that the name is associated with the outcome. The thing about marketing, as an example, is really people don't want marketing. What they want is the outcome, and that's usually more clients or more money or more revenue. So have a name that usually represents what it is you do. The other thing too is there's a few other considerations that you need to take into account. Strangely enough, one of the biggest determining factors is you might come up with an absolutely beautiful, brilliant name, and then you find that you go and look at the business names register or the ASIC company register, and you find the name's already been used, and so back to square one, back to the drawing board. The other thing that often brings your best idea unstuck is that you have come up with a brilliant name. It's available on the company names register or business names register, and then you go and try and find a domain name, and you find that it's already been used. And so you can try a range of different, alterations or derivations or variations on the idea. But if you've got a really killer name, then you may find that there's no domain name that's close or similar, and so that can be a factor there as well. And so it's not necessarily something that's easy and straightforward, and generally what you find is you need to come up with a number of different options. And so when I first set up Transformed 12 years ago, we first went through the process of identifying the business name, and for us, we've had the name Transformed. It represents a change or an improvement or a growth or something like that, and so it can apply to a range of different types of business functions and products and services. It's not just about training or education. It could be used in a number of different contexts. So that was something that we were thinking about. Obviously, we got the logo designed, and the graphic device in the logo represents that change and transformation as well. So there's a link there. And then the strapline underneath, we've actually used a number of different straplines over time. At the moment, the one we're using is Build Your Capability. And so what it does, that strapline gives an indication of what the business is and what it does. It's almost like a brand promise. So we found the name. We then went and found the domain name, and just happened to be that transformed.com.au and transformed.net.au was available, and so we were able to use those domain names. Now what you tend to find is that quite often the domain names that are available tend to be longer domain names, and at the time when I chose Transformed, that was a really long name, because quite often at the time, back in the 2005-2006 timeframe, the domain names were usually 3 or 4 letters or 3 or 4 words, characters in a name, and so it'd be things like IBM or ASG or DOD or whatever it happened to be. So they're really short domain names, and quite often they were an abbreviation or mnemonic or something else like that. So that was what was used at the time. So to go to transform, that was a really long name, but nowadays it's even longer. The other thing to think about too when it comes to domain names, whether you're going to go for a .com, a .net, a .biz, there's been a huge number of different domain names created and released, and so you're not just constrained to the .net, .biz, .org, .com type domain names anymore. You can have a much broader name. The other thing too is, are you going to be only working in a local or an Australian market? Are you going to be working in an international or global market? And so generally, if you're going to be an international business, you could go, let's just call your name is Smith Proprietary Limited. You could be smith.com, or you could be smith.world or smith.global. And so there's a huge range of different names that you can actually use now. And so if you do need to go for a domain name, go and look at the various domain name registries. I tend to go to godaddy.com. And you can see all of the different ranges of potential domain names. And so you just type in Smith, and then it'll give you a list of all of the domain names that are available that are associated with that. So it helps you to be able to then choose. So that's it for me this week. So when it comes back to it, just in summary, business name, make it something that's an outcome that it's something that the customers over time will recognize, and it gives some link between what it is that you do and the outcome you achieve. If you go for an obscure or a bizarre name, it doesn't really sort of resonate with people. The other thing too is to think about, as I mentioned, try not to keep your own name in the business name, because more often than not, if it gets to the point where you're no longer involved with the business, or you want to sell the business, or it's acquired or whatever, Bob's Plumbing, where there's no actual Bob, may not really cut it. And then, of course, the other thing is to make sure the business name's available and the domain name's something you can use. So that's it for me for this week. So no matter what the goal, the objective, or your strategy, let's get out there and get it done. Cheers.